Welcome, good afternoon. My name is Camelia Garcia. Welcome to Hybrid Archive, Expanding Access while Building Our Skills. I am the Director of Collections at the New Mexico Holocaust Museum and Gellert Center for Education, and I'm going to be covering the first part of our Expanding Access through New Digital Platforms section, talking about virtual flipbooks. Before we dive in here, I want to draw your attention to the fact that we have a QR code and also a bit.ly in the corner of the screen, and that will continue through the slide deck for today's presentation. So please feel free to take advantage of that. As I mentioned, I'm going to be starting off the presentation today, talking about expanding access and enhancing archival materials to virtual flipbooks. And then my colleague, Louis Twite, the museum's researcher and program designer, will be talking about other digital tools that also incorporate our collection materials into our education and curricula building. And then the folks from Center for Creative Photography will be taking over to discuss a virtual reference session. All right, so I'll jump right in here. A quick background on our museum. The New Mexico Holocaust Museum was founded by survivor Werner Gellert, his wife Frankie, and fellow survivor Julia K. Lerner in 1998. We opened our doors in 2001. We're located here in downtown Albuquerque. Please come visit. The founders were anxious that there be a Holocaust memorial and museum in the state of New Mexico. They used the lessons of the Holocaust to talk about other instances of genocide throughout history and educate to prevent atrocity. That being said, the New Mexico Holocaust Museum itself is located on Pueblo land, in a place where indigenous communities have faced and resisted genocide, cultural oppression, and violation of land and water rights for generations. As part of our mission as a museum, we must commit as an institution to building communities that respect and honor indigenous people and their rights throughout New Mexico. So, virtual flipbooks. Why did we decide to take on this project? Again, some background. So our museum was almost entirely volunteer run until 2017. And as a result, all of the museum has been collecting since its beginning. There haven't been a lot of processes and procedures. So accessioning and cataloging really didn't begin in earnest until a couple of years ago. And a lot of that backlog has kept the collection from getting seen or used as much as we would like. So as we were beginning to do that kind of processing, we were thinking about having more materials accessible more quickly while we continued our work. And we ourselves were being faced with a lot of materials that had become dissociated, that lost their records or their original order. So in the back of our minds were, what were some additional mechanisms that could possibly be put in place that would help prevent that in the future? Digital replicas seemed like a way to tackle some of these issues. These virtual flipbooks are easy to share online. They're another way to preserve knowledge of the collection, and it's more likely the more people who are able to view them, their histories will remain alive and part of our collective community memory. And then virtual exhibit development potential. So could these virtual flipbooks become a part of either online exhibits or a virtual component to something in our exhibit gallery? And we really looked at scrapbooks and family albums. And a major consideration here was also preservation and conservation concerns. So some of the materials we were dealing with were very, but also quite fragile. Scrapbooks can be very difficult to care for given their many material components all touching or in contact with one another. So there was a possibility we were going to have to remove some of those or separate them for preservation. And as we were processing, we were getting this very unique experience of handling a physical scrapbook because of all of those composite materials. And that's just not done justice by a simple page-by-page imaging. So could these virtual flipbooks help us to better replicate that experience of a physical scrapbook? And for these reasons, the materials were already being prioritized for digitization, so we knew that we would have digital images available to make flipbooks. And one that was chosen was the Kubier family scrapbook. The scrapbook is part of the larger Kubier family collection. The collection was a gift of Jim Kubier, who is the son of Kurt and Edith Kubier. Edith and Kurt were both Holocaust survivors from Jewish families living in Austria. Both of their families were involved in the camera and photography business in Vienna. Edith and Kurt were able to escape in the late 1930s. They'd go on to settle in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and open Kurt's Camera Corral, an iconic business in Nob Hill, here in Albuquerque, which was open for over 60 years. So here was a scrapbook that was in somewhat fragile condition. It was looking very likely we were going to have to separate some of the materials for preservation. And we wanted to be able to capture its appearance and order as it was when it came into our care. It was also part of a collection that includes artifacts, other photographs, supplemental documents. So it seemed like making a virtual flipbook might be a way to connect the larger collection. And the collection that speaks directly to the experience of Holocaust survivors, the survivor community in New Mexico, and the Albuquerque history along historic Route 66. So a lot of relevance for our institution, for our community, and a lot of potential that we could learn more from the community about the Kubiers story. So we chose Flipping Book as the online service for creating these digital flip books. And this is the Kubier family scrapbook. That link will take you there, also the QR code. And these digital images were created with the support of a grant from New Mexico Historical Records Advisory Board. And as I say, you can get to the virtual replica through this code, but here's just a picture of what that landing page will look like, just the outer cover of the album, nothing too special there. There's also a brief description of the Kubiers, their story, what you can expect to find inside the scrapbook, and how to use the enhanced content. And we chose the Flipping Book service because of these enhanced content features. And I'll talk about what that means. So Flipping Book allows for interactive components, and how that shows up in the scrapbook is you'll see a magnifying glass appear on the page where there's additional content. And clicking on that magnifying glass will access it. Links and pop-ups are what we primarily use. So in this case, you can see we've got a picture here of the scrapbook, some photographs of London, and then a few items that have been attached to the scrapbook, including this booklet, While You're in England, helpful information and guidance for every refugee. And clicking on the magnifying glass will open up the PDF to the scan of that full booklet. And this booklet was given to Edith Kubier when she arrived in the UK, along with her alien registration card. She arrived as a Jewish refugee in 1938. And if you scan through the document, you'll see that it includes helpful advice for newly arrived refugees, such as don't read German newspapers in public. You'll see another magnifying glass is also on this page, and this one does open up Kurt Kubier's Reisepass, his German passport. So it's a way to look inside of that passport, but it also gives us the opportunity to add some additional content, to add some context to the Reisepass, and to the challenges that we're facing Jewish refugees at that time. So again, these are just two other ways in which we could get closer to replicating that experience of being able to pull out composite materials that are part of the scrapbook, much like you would if you were handling the physical version. As I mentioned, there are also artifacts that are connected to this collection. So here one more pop out that shows you an artifact from the Kubier family collection. This is a tallis that belonged to Hugo Kubier, Kurt Kubier's father, and Hugo shows up repeatedly in the scrapbook. So this was an opportunity to tell a bit more of his story, of his biography, to enrich the context of the entire scrapbook, and to show this personal item and talk about Hugo's relationship to his faith. So, again, we're being able to tie other parts of the collection to the scrapbook and make the user aware that there may be artifacts or additional resources that could be of interest. And then finally, of course, Flipping Book has what they call their call to action button. So this is a way to solicit feedback. It appears in the scrapbooks as this have something to share button. It's on every single page, and it takes the user directly to our collections catalog feedback form so that they can provide feedback. Of course, all feedback is welcome and helps us manage our collections. But as I mentioned, the museum has many found in collections items, and crowd and community sourcing information has been crucial in helping the museum to identify photographs, to reconcile our found in collections items, and to developing our descriptions. We also know from working with our multi-generational survivor community that the trauma of the Holocaust has made it very difficult sometimes to share personal histories and family stories. So this is just another path to share those stories. It's another unintrusive way for survivors, families of survivors, to get in touch and help share some of their knowledge. As you can see a picture here from the Kubier family scrapbook, and also from Almanac Shanghai. This is part of the museum's Shanghai refugee materials, and it has also been digitized into a flipbook. You can check it out using that link. So just to sum up here, these are all works in progress, but we are hoping to develop them more. Hopefully they are able to reach more people. It gives access to those that can't travel to see our collections, more accessibility for folks using adaptive technologies. It brings closer the experience of handling a physical scrapbook with lots of component parts. There's a greater possibility we're going to get some of that feedback from our community, from crowd and community source knowledge about our collection that'll add to our descriptions. And it can bring these fragile archival materials into the public eye more easily without compromising preservation. We are ever optimistic about our future as a museum, but the future isn't knowable. So just having another virtual repository, another digital replica that preserves original order and an appearance in an uncertain world can be very helpful as well. So that concludes what I have for you today. I'm going to turn this presentation over to my colleague Louis Feit, and he's going to talk about some additional digital tools for incorporating archival and collections materials into our education and curricula building program.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Louis. Thank you, Amelia. I'm going to give a brief overview of the museum's educational outreach programs before diving into the projects that I'll be presenting on. So as my colleague mentioned earlier, Holocaust and genocide education was central to the vision of the museum's founders, and today it remains one of the main institutional drives of the museum. Although we are a small museum with very limited space, we have been able to bring in students from middle and high schools across the city of Albuquerque and even the state of New Mexico. Hundreds of students have toured our museum and learned about the path to Nazi genocide and how pervasive and long-held beliefs of racism and anti-Semitism could escalate to the murder of millions of people. The Holocaust is a difficult subject to teach, but it is especially difficult to teach it to children. We found over the course of giving these tours that students tend to relate the most to the physical objects in the museum's collection. Having these tangible connections to the past really helps students relate to the stories that we're telling. But unfortunately, we just don't have the physical space to display all of the unique objects in our collection or to bring large groups of students into the archives. So the question is, how do we incorporate our collections into the museum's educational programming, given our limited space and limited resources? I'm going to talk about a couple of the free programs that we've been working with. They will probably be familiar to all of you. So these are definitely works in progress. They're still in development, but they have the potential to be really exciting new assets to our growing educational programs. So first up are President. Many of you are probably familiar with this platform. It's basically like an amped up version of PowerPoint. One nice thing about it is that it allows for creating clusters of information, each of which that contain dozens of subtopics all nested together. This can get kind of unwieldy, but it is a great way of presenting a multifaceted topic with a lot of information. So the President I'm going to talk about is still in development, and rather than risking overburdening our very overburdened technology in this room and taking you to an external website, I'm just going to take you through some of the relevant features here of the project. So this is called Explore Our Collections, and it is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a presentation of some of the interesting and unique materials we don't have the space to display in the museum. As you can see, they're grouped here on the screen according to each collection. So the Werner Gellert Shanghai collection includes objects owned by one of the museum's founders, Werner Gellert, related to the time he spent in Shanghai after escaping Germany after Kristallnacht. There's another section here on Austrian Jews who fled Vienna before the Holocaust, including the Kubier family that Camelia just told you about. We also recently acquired materials owned by a woman named Dorothy Adams Green, who worked on one of the Nuremberg trials. And then finally, there is a section here dedicated to objects that speak to Jewish survival and persistence throughout the Holocaust. So clicking on any one of these topics here, It's going to bring you to a page where you can select the object or the group of objects that you're interested in seeing. So this example here on the screen is from the survivors section and features one of the cooler collections of objects that we have, which is called Hidden Treasures. This is a dollhouse consisting of 5 room boxes and over 500 individual miniatures owned by a German Jewish family from Bad Homburg, Germany. The earliest pieces of the dollhouse date back to the 1850s and 60s, and it was a treasured family object. The family managed to flee Germany in 1936, and the dollhouse was hidden in the attic of a Christian family friend who kept it safe throughout the war, and who later managed to reunite it with the family. The family continued adding objects in the following decades. It might be kind of hard to make out the pictures here on the screen, but there's like a wide range of objects from different time periods. There's like an electric can opener, there's a wiener warmer, there's all kinds of cool stuff in there. If you want to see it, come to the museum. But it ends up being a pretty extraordinary snapshot of the life of a German Jewish family over time. And then each one of these sections has sort of primary source activities baked into them, making them a really good tool for teachers to use. So in the upper right-hand corner of the screen here, you can see a topic called Think Like a Historian. And when you click on that, it'll bring you to just a few questions to help guide students. It offers a deeper level of analysis, so asking them to think critically about these objects and the meanings that they hold. So for every part of the collection that they explore through this presentation, there is a section like this guiding them through the process of analyzing primary sources. This presentation also includes a section on recognizing propaganda. It's based around another one of our collections, which are cigarette cards depicting propaganda images of Hitler and other symbols of the Nazi Party. Using these cards, students learning about Nazi Germany have the chance to analyze historical propaganda and to recognize the themes running through it and why those themes were effective at marshaling German public opinion towards the Nazis. So for example, this image here shows the tendency for Nazis to portray themselves in a strong militaristic light, emphasizing their military prowess and their eagerness to fight for Germany. So by recognizing themes like this that were prevalent in historical propaganda, students are better equipped to recognize the propaganda that they see in their daily lives, and they will hopefully be able to approach that with increased critical thinking skills. Okay, so the second digital tool that I want to talk about is a feature from ArcGIS called Story Maps. A lot of you probably have interacted with these in your work. But I just think they're super cool. ArcGIS is a platform for creating interactive digital maps, and Story Maps combines this capability with other tools to tell digital stories. There is a paid subscription for this service, but I just used the free version of Story Maps, and it had literally everything I could have needed, making it a really nice low-cost option. On the screen here is an example of a story map I completed last year, which was centered around the destruction of synagogues in Jewish communities throughout Europe during the Holocaust. And so, as you can see here, the screen is split into 2 halves. And on one side, there are some photographs, and on the other side, there is a map marked with various points. So you can navigate this map by either clicking on the photograph to learn individual stories about these places, or if you're interested in what happened in a particular country, you can click on the marker here on the map, and it will bring up the relevant articles associated with that geographic place. So it's a really great way to tie stories and places together, allowing for really deeper storytelling from the archives. So the project, there it is. We'll see what happens. That was just an example of the kind of project that are possible through story maps. And now I'll talk about what we're doing with some of the things in our collection. So one really amazing item that we have is around 13 minutes of footage shot in 3 Polish towns, or shtetls, which are majority Jewish, Yiddish-speaking, culturally Yiddish towns in Poland and throughout Eastern Europe that had a distinct culture and way of life. And these places were largely destroyed during the Holocaust, but this footage was shot in the 1930s, before the German invasion of Poland. So this is some pretty amazing footage, providing a really rare look into a culture and society that was targeted for destruction by the Nazis just a few years after this was shot. So I want to play a little bit of this footage for you, hopefully. but both because I just want as many people as possible to see it, and also because it will give you some context for this project that we're working on. It's about 30 seconds and there's no audio, so don't be worried when there's no sound. Okay. Well, it worked in Google. Okay, I'm sorry about that, guys, but I'll just keep going just so that we don't go over time here. But essentially the footage is just of people in the town, right? Of the individual who shot it, his family members were from these towns. And so it's just footage of children gathering together, just of the village. One of my favorite shots is like a really well-dressed man climbing down a ladder, and he just looks so pleased with himself for being able to do that. It's delightful. It's just incredible footage of people, right? So this project takes this footage and breaks it down into several components in order to kind of bring the world of the shtetls to life. So at the top here, there is a search bar where you can navigate between the different sections of the story map, including family and community life, the role of children in these societies and the lives that they led, the kind of education that they had, the establishment and history of Jewish cemeteries, as well as economic and political life. There's a lot of really rich political organizations, Jewish political organizations at this time. So each section is accompanied by a relevant clip from the footage, which brings a human element to the historical facts. And then at the bottom here, there is a way to include your sources, which is always important. And it just ends up being a unique, dynamic way to approach digital storytelling in the archives. And while this project is still kind of in the early stages, I'm really excited to take it further and get it so that more people can see this incredible footage. So basically, to wrap things up for my end, we're really excited about the potential of these free platforms to increase access to our archives, and particularly for students. The history of the Holocaust and of genocides around the world is so important for kids to learn, and getting access to our archival materials and learning how they contribute to our understanding of the past helps to teach them how to make sense of the world they live in today. It is our goal that students take this knowledge and use it to arm themselves in the continued fight for a world without hatred and genocide. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emily Wyrick from the Creative Center for Photography so that she and her colleagues can tell you all about the cool stuff they're doing.
Thank you, Louis. Sharing my screen here. All right. Do we have slides for people?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks. Hi, I'm Emily Wyrick. I am an associate archivist here at the Center for Creative Photography in Public Services at our study center. So I work with our researchers. I and my colleagues are joining you today from the University of Arizona campus in Tucson, Arizona, and we would like to respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous people. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, as well as tribes that are working towards federal recognition, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. So for my presentation today, I am going to give you a little bit of an overview of the Center for Creative Photography if you haven't been to visit before. And I'll talk about why we have started our virtual reference services, how we're doing these sessions, what the sessions are, who comes to them, and what some of the benefits have been both for our users and for our staff. Okay, so this is a picture of our lovely 70s or 80s brutalist building here. This is the Center for Creative Photography. We've been around since 1974, and we collect photography holistically. So we have a fine print collection, an archive collection, oral history collection, and a library. Our archive holds close to 300 archives at this point, and those are archives of photographers, curators, writers, gallerists, professional organizations, again, anyone having anything to do with photography pretty broadly. And our study center hosts annually about 65 to 75 researchers. So while our numbers are a little bit low, often our study center visitors have some pretty intense visits. So it ends up being a good amount of staff time on our end when we do have visitors. And as you may know, and I think likely is true for many of us in this particular conference, Tucson is a bit off the beaten path, and it's a little bit hard to get here if you're not trying to get here. So that brings us into some of our expansion of reference services, which we started working on pretty recently. So as we all know, there was a pandemic, and the staff were not allowed on campus for about a year, from March of 2020 through May of 2021. And we weren't allowed to have visitors in the study center for a longer period. That ended up being close to a year and a half. So it was a significant gap there where we were trying to help people, trying to build our services and wanting to accommodate more people. Overall, we also hired a new director of our archives and our digital strategies. They started working with us in the spring of 2021 and led a push to have us really expand our research services generally. So that's led not only to the service that we're talking about here in this presentation today, but also to streamlining our reference imaging process and implementing live answers and streamlining the reference process that way. And overall, we wanted to increase collection access. Distance, as mentioned, is often a big factor for us and for researchers being able to come to visit. Oftentimes, we have researchers who have fairly small asks. So we have people who might come and stay for weeks or months, but we also have folks who just want to look at one or two folders. And those are things that we can accommodate through our research services without having to have someone come in. As we've expanded our imaging services for reference imaging, sometimes people also want to request a large number of things. And our sessions can be helpful in terms of narrowing down what exactly it is that they're requesting, so they're not requesting materials that they don't need to see. And of course, we also have these virtual reference sessions. So these are, this is an idea that our new supervisor brought in from their previous institution. It was something that had been pretty successful there, and they suggested that we try it. We thought it was a good idea and gave it a go. So how we're doing this is we use a HoverCam. As you can see on the screen here, this is what the HoverCam looks like. And so for our virtual access sessions, we will plug this camera into our laptops. We will run the Flex 11 software that my colleague Ashley is going to give you some more details about in a moment. We run that software, and it enables us to point that camera down at archival objects. We run that concurrently with a Zoom session so that people can see us, we can see them, and they can also see the materials that we have. So in terms of getting this set up and the cost associated with it, there's an upfront cost in buying the camera. We went with the Solo 8 model, which is not the fanciest of all of the HoverCams. We're fortunate here at CCP to have a really wonderful imaging department. We worked with them to evaluate some of the different features of the cameras and figured out that we didn't need the fanciest model. It had features that we just wouldn't use in this setting. So we were able to save a little bit of money there by buying the appropriate equipment. I will mention also that we do benefit from being part of a large campus. So we do not have annual Zoom expenses. We have an institutional Zoom account through the University of Arizona. That said, most of our sessions are 45 minutes long. So I do think it's possible that you could run these sessions without having a paid Zoom account as well. There's an annual cost to the service as well, in that we have started a Calendly account. So we have two accounts that we run. And Calendly has been really wonderful in terms of cutting out the back and forth between us and the people who are trying to set up sessions. Sometimes we have people who follow the prompts on the website, and we don't have any interaction with them other than seeing their requests come in, having them fill out the form that comes with the request so we know what their questions are, and then we just meet them on Zoom for the very first time. So that's been really great. If it's possible to swing that, if you're considering this, I'd recommend it. Okay, and then we have two general session types. So we do reference interviews. They're very traditional reference interviews that everyone is familiar with. And we do a lot of one-on-one instruction in these sessions. They're really great because we're able to meet our researchers where they're at the moment, and to really work with them on their particular research and what their needs are. We do a lot of co-browsing in these sessions, where we're working with researchers to try and help them think through their research strategies and how our resources here at CCP can most benefit their research, and to make their perhaps limited time that they might be on site really effective and productive for them. The other approximately half of these sessions that we do are virtual access sessions. So these are the sessions where we're running the HoverCam. People will request boxes in advance, and we can show them some materials in the collection. So far, we have met with people from all over and in a variety of different situations. We meet with a lot of students, undergrads, grad students. We meet with professors and curators. We've met with a research collective out of the university. And we also meet with curious members of the public who are just interested in our collections. So it's been great to connect with people for all sorts of reasons through this service. In the past roughly year and a quarter, we've run about 50 of these sessions. And so that might seem like a lot, but it's spread out over several people here, and again, over a fairly long time. One thing that I forgot to mention before is that with our Calendly account, we don't only use Calendly for these sessions. We have found that there are other places in our daily work lives that can be beneficial to have some scheduling assistance. But again, these virtual reference services sessions, whether it's the one-on-one instruction or virtual access, are run through Calendly, and 50 of them seems like a good number to start with. And there have been some great benefits. Oh, sorry. One more thing. We've met with people from all over. So we've met with people from the UK, from several countries in the European Union, from Australia and Mexico, and of course, people from all across the US. And what have the benefits been? So accessibility, this makes it possible for people who might not otherwise be able to come to CCP, whether they're local or not, to access our collections. There's a financial benefit for it as well, in that you don't have to pay for travel to get here. We don't have fees to use the archive, but trips to come to Tucson can sometimes be expensive. And so this can be a great way to eliminate those costs. The educational component has been really good for our researchers. We found that they found it to be helpful in terms of planning their visits. And the sessions can be pretty quick. So it's a quick way to get an answer to a question sometimes. You eliminate some of the back and forth that you might have through using live answers, waiting for someone to respond and then waiting for another person to ask another question and then waiting for someone to follow up. Sometimes you can just schedule a 45-minute session and answer all of those questions quickly. On the staff side, we've also found there to be benefits. We've learned a new technology and a new way of conducting reference, always helpful to build our skills in different ways. While we might not use this technology for forever, I do think the concept is one that's going to stay around here at CCP. We also work with a lot of students here. As you all may know, there's an iSchool here at the University of Arizona. So we have a bunch of student workers, one of whom you're going to hear from in a bit. And we have those students work in reference here. A lot of times students come to us with very little to no training in reference. And so we teach them how reference is conducted. Being able to add this technology and this service into into our repertoire has enabled us to show them another component of reference and to teach them another component. On a personal note, it's also been helpful for me as somebody who is learning constantly how to teach people how to do reference better. I've gotten great feedback from the students that we've worked with, such as Elias, who you're going to hear from a bit, that I think are working, that their feedback can help me to become better at teaching, and I've really appreciated that. So thank you all very much for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ashley.
Okay, so let me just go ahead and share my screen. And so hopefully you can all see that. All right, perfect. So hello, I am Ashley Swinford. I am the Public Services Assistant here at the Center for Creative Photography. I work in the Volkerding Study Center with Emily, and I do conduct some of these virtual reference sessions. Today, I will be going over a little bit more details about our virtual reference, managing expectations, and touching on some limitations and solutions to the service. Sorry. So sessions are 45 minutes to 1 hour on Zoom, but sessions can be longer if needed, and we can schedule more than one session if it is also needed. There is a little bit of prep work that is needed beforehand. It's not terribly too much. Researchers request which boxes that they would like to see, and then we pull these before our session. And there's also just a really quick setup of the session itself, which includes setting up the HoverCam to the laptop, and then setting up the camera, and then just fixing the space up. So this image that is here on the screen is just a simple setup on a table, and just showing that we're looking at some correspondence from the collection. So what researchers think. So overall, we've gotten really positive comments from researchers. They really appreciated being able to see the collections, even if they are in a virtual capacity. Sometimes we have, like Emily mentioned, sometimes we have researchers who are not able to make trips to Tucson. So this service has really allowed people to have greater access to the collections. And it's also allowed people to for us to connect with them and to help them, even just if it is just searching a finding aid to get more information. So a lot of the researchers that I've met with have mentioned that this is a service that they've never had before. So as new as it is to us, it is new to a lot of our researchers as well. So we've often sometimes gotten those comments. And this is a great example of relationship building and helping us to further relationship with researchers. Some of the researchers that we do these sessions with, we have corresponded with email reference. So it does help us to put a face to a name. However, that doesn't necessarily have to be a case. Anybody can schedule a virtual reference. And if they feel more comfortable to, sharing face-to-face versus email, then they're able to do that as well. So managing expectations. Sometimes we do have to manage expectations of what our virtual reference is. We are not virtual reference assistants, and we cannot show an entire box, or let's say somebody was interested in looking at like 10 folders. It would just not be possible for us within the time that we have in order to share every content of every folder. So managing expectations can sometimes be difficult, especially for researchers who are not able to come in to the CCP, because we still want to provide as much access as we can, but we also have to understand where we have to meet some expectations and manage them. So that's when managing time also becomes important, especially with the sessions only being 45 to 1 hour. So I always like to understand what researchers are looking at, or what they want to look at. So I kind of look at the material ahead of time, and kind of understand the amount of material so that I can understand how to best manage the session. And what I also like to do is when I do get on the virtual session, I like to just ask the researcher what they're interested in looking at first, because just in case we do run out of time, at least we got what they wanted to look at first out of the way, and then we can schedule more reference sessions if needed. So there are some limitations and solutions. So with virtual reference sessions, technical issues can come up on Zoom. The HoverCam has sometimes known to freeze, but these have all been pretty minor issues, and they're usually issues that can be fixed within the session. If there are issues that cannot be fixed within the session, usually researchers are pretty flexible with just scheduling another session when possible, and we use the Calendly for that. Depending on what you were looking at, there may be size limitations for certain material. So here at the CCP, we have a range of material. We have from small negatives to larger photo albums. So I've gotten around this issue by being creative with the placement of the camera. So it just requires a little bit of maneuvering, but it's something that can be done. So on this slide, I have just some setup of what that maneuvering can look like. So the first one here on the left is just a setup of looking at some negatives from one of the collections, and we're using a light box. So as we can see, I'm able to show the researcher on Zoom the negatives, and it does give a pretty clear view. This example is usually pretty helpful, especially for researchers who kind of just want to confirm if we have this negative, or they may be interested in a reproduction later on. And it's something that we can do fairly quick, where they wouldn't have to make a trip here into the CCP. So the second example that I have on the right is a larger photo album that we have in our collection. And so how to best show that on the screen to the researcher is I just stacked some empty archival boxes and put the camera up higher. So then that way I was able to show a little bit more of the photo album on the screen. So I'll tell you a little bit about the HoverCam software. So the HoverCam software that we used is called Flex 11. This software has a lot of features. You can rotate the image, you can focus the camera, and you can also adjust the brightness and the contrast as well. So depending on what type of material you're looking at, this software does give you the options to kind of manipulate the image on the screen in order to get the best picture for the researcher. These can be helpful features because it allows you to kind of just play around. The software also allows you to take snapshots of the image that you're looking at, which sometimes can be helpful for the researchers if they need it. So down here on the bottom, it kind of gives you a little bit of options where you can record, you can make a snapshot. So it's pretty simple software to use. You don't have to be very technologically savvy to use it. It's a quick download for the software, and then it's really quick to upload and use. So overall, in my conclusion, in doing the virtual reference, I have found to be a very positive experience. Researchers, not only has it allowed us to connect with researchers from across the globe for people who may not be able to visit us, but it's also been a positive experience for me as well, because it's a new experience. I've never done this in any institution before. So, and I was excited about it at first because I think it's a really great option in order to meet with people, even if it's just showing them the finding aid. We kind of have that more of the face-to-face versus over email. And also it helps with collection access. I think that we've met with people who have been excited about what they've seen. And they have talked about, wow, I didn't know I could have this service. And then all of a sudden we have the service, and then they find something that was really helpful for them in their research. So I think it's really a really great idea to help collection access. And so it's my hope in the future that more archives have the same service offered. Hopefully, I have shown a little bit about how it's not super expensive to set up. Emily talked a little bit about the cost. So it's not like a huge heavy service to have. And I do think it has really great benefits. So I will go ahead and move it forward to my colleague Elias, who will talk more about the virtual reference.
Thank you, Ashley. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see everyone, be it on Zoom or in Albuquerque. Like mentioned before, my name's Elias Laralde. I'm the graduate archival assistant at the Center for Creative Photography, and I'll be presenting my presentation, Learning Reference Through a Hybrid Model of Student Workers' Thoughts. So starting in the fall of 2022, I reached out to Ashley to talk about her experiences working with researchers and some of the questions that she was working on due to me being curious. This then led to Emily asking whether I wanted to join the reference team and take on some questions weekly. For a bit of background, I started at the CCP in the fall of 2021 as a graduate archival assistant, which mainly had me processing a backlog of accruals and collections that had piled up due to the pandemic. My supervisor for this portion was not Emily, and the work was mainly focused on my processing skills in creating/updating finding aids for our collections. When my supervisor announced that she had accepted a new position and was leaving, I was tasked with one very large processing project to work on. It was due to this switch that I found myself wanting to expand the things I was doing at the CCP, and I felt I was only focusing on one part of the archival process. And at times I was getting overwhelmed with this mountain of a collection I had to work on. I'm currently getting my MLIS from the University of Arizona, and sadly there is not a class dedicated to reference work in our curriculum. As an archival student, the only mention of reference work is in the Intro to Archives class as one of our weekly modules. Therefore, I was a bit hesitant to start as I had no idea where to begin. Luckily, Emily told me that in order to start, we'd first study reference work through the Ohio Reference Excellence Professional Development Training Program, which consists of 6 modules aimed to explain the basics of reference. These online modules grounded my work with my reference questions and were accompanied by weekly meetings with Emily where we talked about each topic together. The reference modules, while based in the public library sphere, were a great resource in understanding the foundations of reference work, such as the purpose of reference, how to listen to patrons, and how to search/use our resources to aid the patrons. Another good feature is its recognition of virtual reference and separate subsections to see how the advice changes when it comes to virtual reference, though this is mainly framed through email and phone work. When I started answering reference questions with the supervision of Emily, I found that our work was done in large part through virtual consultations through LibAnswers, Aeon, and these virtual Zoom sessions. Even though I worked at the CCP for over a year by then, I have seen Emily and Ashley do these kinds of sessions, my brain was still thrown off by this. I suppose the image in my head of reference is more akin to public librarianship, with a stream of people coming to desks asking about the resources, as it was something I saw as a kid and has stuck ever since. When it came to these Zoom virtual sessions, I would see both Emily and Ashley conduct them while processing in the same area, so it wasn't an alien concept to me. I thought it was really cool and honestly something that all archives did. It was not until Emily told me that the opposite was true that I was a bit surprised and started to think about how these sessions can help a variety of people for any archive. Overall, I agree with my colleagues that this setup can greatly benefit and expand the collection's reach to the public and to researchers. One of the things I hear a lot from researchers is their gratitude for this program to exist so they can see some materials. Therefore, the effect of this program is already taking place with some of the researchers and with our collections. While I was answering 1 or 2 reference questions through email threads on LibAnswers, I was invited to shadow Emily when she was conducting these virtual sessions herself. This shadow encompasses both looking at materials with researchers and meetings where we hear about their projects and help them look for materials through our finding aids. I personally found it a lot of fun and exciting to connect to researchers beyond email threads and see them physically, albeit virtually, especially the researchers, like we said, who come from different countries. Connecting this work a bit to some of the lessons from the Ohio modules, nuance and context of what people write in emails is sometimes hard to decipher. So having the opportunity to hear researchers, to see and hear researchers is a great way to clear that up. Whoopsies. And another thing I argue is that these conversations provide an informal and low-risk environment for researchers to explain their research, get help navigating our systems, and get any feedback or suggestions by us surrounding their project and how collections can help, which may ease overall anxiety that they have when coming to our archive. As I slowly got through the reference modules and had more experience both answering and viewing how Emily conducted these meetings, I was tasked by Emily to lead my very own session with a researcher. This was exciting and really put my knowledge since then to the test. Luckily, of course, Emily would be right next to me when I led, just in case some technical issues would arise or if the researcher had questions that went beyond my knowledge. I'm happy to say that this first meeting went smoothly, and I just recently got the chance to lead another one. I feel more confident overall in my reference work, both through these Zoom sessions and through our lib answers. However, challenges are ever present. The overall process of doing a virtual reference session was something to get used to and also dependent on the researcher. One has to be prepared for a meeting that is straightforward, with the researcher just wanting to see various materials to take quick notes for a future research project or a possible image request. On the other hand, a more conversational or exploratory session has us do the same thing while also answering more questions that come up from the researcher and maybe even a quick look at our finding aid through the share screen feature. The archivist has to be open to both, and sometimes it's not as black and white as we would like it. The overall awkwardness of Zoom meetings, as we've all been witness to due to the pandemic, can make this a bit tricky to navigate, but nothing that is insurmountable. The setting up of the hover camera can add to this awkwardness, so practicing how to set it up and how to work the camera before each meeting was beneficial for me in case some issues would arise during the meeting. To the short time of these meetings, 45 to an hour max, it is important to have a plan coming in and relaying that plan to the researcher to make sure that each of you are on the same page. At the same time, I've learned through Emily that one has to re-engage the researcher to see what they really want to do in the meeting, and sometimes that doesn't line up with your agenda. Making sure you have short breaks to collect yourself and making sure you're explaining each of your moves to the researcher is key. As well, at the end of the meeting, reviewing what we have done and the next steps for both you and the researcher is crucial to start these next steps, whatever they might be. A challenge I think that needs to be explored more is the digital divide or digital fluency that not all researchers have. This can be informed by a variety of reasons, but as Emily taught me, we are not only answering a patron's questions, but also teaching them informational literacy. Therefore, informational literacy also intertwines with some technical literacy, but nothing too excessive as that can eat up to the actual reference work. One example of this was when I explained to a researcher that she could screenshot her screen to have some of the images for her to look back at. She told me that she didn't really know how to do that, but knowing her through the email threads and her skill set during that meeting, it seemed that she was better just looking at the video and taking notes than taking the time to screenshot each image. Therefore, being cognizant of the researcher and the signals that they give is important to making sure the meeting goes as smoothly as possible. Lastly, the golden rule of reference is not to become a researcher's personal assistant. This line in a physical sense is always challenging and something we need to regularly take stock in to make sure we have not crossed it. I personally feel that the line gets even blurrier within virtual reference as the frame of engagement, us as the researchers handling the material through a screen that the researcher is viewing, as an archivist handling the materials that the researcher is viewing, can make us larger participants in the research process. So having a good sense of boundaries and saying that vocally to the researcher is helpful. These meetings are not total substitute for research due to the short time and the limitations of technology. So I have to remind myself that this is just the first step for many researchers and should be enveloped in the usual guidelines that govern our email and physical reference work. I'm graduating in May and looking for future employment in the archive or special collections field. This experience with virtual reference has informed me not only about the foundations of reference and how to listen to people, but to also explore how digital technologies and other services can be used to provide new ways of engagement for researchers. There are various obstacles, both physical and not physical, that can impede researchers and our collections. Therefore, these new ways of engagement can help build bridges and tear down some of these obstacles, which overall benefits both the researchers and an archive in the long term. Thank you. Alrighty, so now that we have finished each of our presentations, it is time for the Q&A. I'll be moderating any of the online questions, either through the chat feature, or if you want to speak, say your question out loud, you can always raise your hand and we will call on you. And the team at the NMHM will be handling any of the physical questions in Albuquerque. So let me unshare my screen.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, I have a question. Can you talk for the CCP folks, but maybe also everyone, how you advertised or marketed that these services were available or newly available?
And did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a website for our research services on the CCP. It's linked in one of my slides if anyone wants to check it out. And so we have a description of the virtual reference services there, as well as instructions for how to set up a session and how to request items if you are interested in virtual access. So we do have people who have found us just through that module, as I mentioned, and other folks we tell about the session. Sometimes people just write to us with their questions in LibAnswers, and we tell them about the service through LibAnswers. So they come to us in those varieties of ways.
And I would also like to just add that I think that in times when we do just offer, or when we tell people about it, almost always they go ahead and set up a session. So that's been really successful. I don't think I've had a time when I don't offer it and they don't schedule a session.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question to the CCP people as well. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about managing expectations. This is something I'm struggling with a lot. Do you put something on your website about that, or do you handle those on a case-by-case basis? How do you do it in a way that feels fair and that you're not having to repeat yourself with every single person you speak to?
Yeah, I usually just tell people directly. I know it can be hard. I have been where you probably have been, where it's hard to tell, especially somebody on the other side of a Zoom, hey, like we're not going to go over this entire folder. Or I've had, somebody wanted me to read them a 30-page letter. It's just I just have to say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do this, but I do let them know about our reference imaging. So it's always nice to give somebody at least like an alternative. So for us, if I'm not able to show somebody an entire folder, I can let them know how many pages there are, and I can tell them a little bit about the reference imaging. So then that way we're able to, make a scan for them, and then they're able to read it on their own. So giving somebody an alternative when possible is great, rather than just telling somebody, no, I can't do this or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll add for times when people are doing virtual access, we do use Aon here at CCP. So we have them submit their box requests in advance. So if we see something come in and the person has asked for a lot of boxes, and particularly if they haven't specified folders within those in any sort of way, we'll follow up with them as soon as we see the request come in and tell them to revise. That said, sometimes you do repeat yourself, and that's I think that I feel like that's part of reference. And it happens much as we try and eliminate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't even offer the virtual services. I just get emails, asking for me to investigate someone from the 1600s, and that's not what I do. So I was wondering, yeah, but that's good. That's really good. I think submitting requests in advance is one way to feel that. Thank you.
The other thing I'll add is canned responses can be helpful. So we use those in LibAnswers, but I think even without LibAnswers, there are ways to, develop canned responses for things that you're very frequently sending out to people. And you can use those to kind of make a more equitable process for setting those expectations so that everyone is getting the same message about like, this is what you can request. This is how you do it. This is the process. And that process is the same for everyone.
Thank you.
Sue, did you have a question? You appeared on our Zoom momentarily. Feel free to jump back in if you have a question. And if not, I can ask a question for our colleagues, for Camelia and Louis. Could you talk a little bit more about the labor and setup for the things that you mentioned today, for flipbooks, for ArcGIS, story maps, and for Prezi? Is it possible to, do you think it's possible for like lone arrangers to do these things? What happens in the setup?
It's minimal. I mean, the hardest part is going to be the research, right? Like actually writing the text that goes into the platforms. I think I speak for both of us when we say we, it's just us individually doing these things. Like we're a very small museum. And I'll just speak personally, like I was trained as a historian, but I had never really used any kind of digital tools like that before. And I just sort of looked it up on my own, and they were easy and pretty intuitive. And yeah, the hardest part is just, the actual research part of it, but the programs themselves are really easy to use.
And yeah, I would agree with everything that Louis said. The programs are very simple to use. As I say, we're already collecting digital images of the scrapbook to try to preserve them and preserve that original order, but it was so special. They're so unique. They're such an incredible artifact. And so having that flipbook, trying to find some sort of format that would more closely replicate that seemed like a really logical conclusion. And it was, since we had the digital images already, as Lynn said, creating the content for sort of the pop-outs or the links was the most labor and time consuming, but it was certainly not overwhelming at all. It was pretty simple to do, and I think yields a lot and can yield a lot of access for not much time in. And I have a quick question for CCP, if I may. So I was wondering, 50 seems like actually quite a lot of engagements. Were you folks expecting to have that kind of response? Were you anticipating that you would get a lot of people? Did you get more than you expected? And how did you manage that if that happened?
I think for me, I went into this, starting up this service with no expectations whatsoever. It was something that, again, my supervisor suggested that we do, and it seemed like a really cool thing to do, and it seemed like it would be fairly easy on our end to do it. I think that we didn't initially have Calendly, so for there was like maybe about a 6-month period where we were setting all of our appointments up manually. And we didn't do nearly as many during that period. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my I don't think I had expectations coming into it. I'm glad that people have found it. I'm glad that, as Ashley said, a lot of times when we suggest these sessions, people just sign up for them. And it's been really great to connect with so many people. We've learned some lessons over time too. So things like, initially that Calendly can really help us out with the scheduling features. So at first, I didn't have a limit on the number of these appointments that I did in a day. And like, you get a day where you have a couple of these sessions in a day, and then it's like, okay, I need to step back and I can do one of these a day. And so now I have the preferences in Calendly set so that I'm only doing one of these a day, so that it's not my entire day complete with like the setup and the prep work that we do, and then putting things away. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add, I started working here in August, so the virtual reference service was already being offered. And in terms of like what my expectations were, I think that it really just depends. Sometimes I might have 2 in a week, and I might go 2 weeks without having one. So it's really hard, depending on what your archive looks like and what kind of your schedule is of researchers, where sometimes there is no way of knowing. But it's been really manageable. It's not, I don't ever feel overwhelmed with it at all.
And for me, because I also started around like last fall, I kind of agree with what Emily and Ashley said, but someone who, for me, who is like very new to reference work, I will be honest that every time Emily gives me a new question on LibAnswers, my first thought is how I can make it into a virtual session, because I'm very excited about it. And I know they're a lot of work, of course, but yeah, I always first think about that, even though sometimes Emily says, well, look at what they're asking for before we reach out with a virtual Zoom session. But yeah, I think the amount of people, you know, I'm very optimistic and saying like, I hope it grows more and people get more used to this kind of program, both in the CCP and just the general archival landscape, that people utilize this kind of technology and seeing how they can expand their reach. So yeah.
Thanks, guys.
So this is for CCP as well. When you have a session, if somebody decides, oh, I want to have a scan of that document or whatever, are they just your regular rules applying there? Any fees, or has?
Was everyone able to hear that?
I didn't hear the very end of it.
Just how many if somebody wants to get a copy of the photo or document, do your regular fees apply then for sharing with a user, or is there a different price schedule?
Yeah, it's we just use the regular process. So with most of these people, we already have contact with them in LibAnswers, and we have a canned response in LibAnswers that has all of the information about how to request something for reference imaging, what you do, and what the costs are. And so we can send that easily. If the person hasn't interacted with us in LibAnswers, it's fairly easy to add a new person in, and we can just type up the question for them and email them from LibAnswers on our own. I will say that's another like lessons learned in starting the service up. Initially, because you can take screenshots in Flex 11, initially I was like, oh, okay, well, this is really cool. I can just we won't have to send this through imaging. I can just take screenshots as we're going through it if the researcher wants them. But that is I would not recommend doing that. So that's another one that did it once, and then I found I became the roadblock, and then I had all of these files that I had to manage and turn from JPEGs into a PDF or otherwise formats. The person can get them and then send them to them. Whereas we have this reference imaging service that we have student workers who are fast. They're very efficient and can get through these requests so quickly. So we do really try and limit the number. We might take just 1 or 2 or 3 screenshots that we'll share with people during a session, but otherwise we just route them through our regular reference imaging service.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask one more question. This time of my former colleagues at the New Mexico Holocaust Museum. Of course, this is my favorite museum. So I'm so excited to see what y'all are doing with all the educational stuff and everything. And I just wondered, I guess kind of two questions. One, like how you see this, if this is like meant to be supplemental to working with schools and having them come in for tours and taking survivors to them. Or if it's really more for people that can't come in to it. And then also, like, if you've thought about how to capture or how to, I guess, get the survivor stories and testimonies, like somehow into an interactive site. Not to like get too far ahead, because I love everything you're doing.
Thanks, Kristen. I can answer sort of the second half of the question, and then the first half of the question, I think Lewis is in a better place to speak to. In terms of collecting survivor stories, we're certainly hopeful that this will be a bridge to do more of that. We have not seen a ton of feedback from the digital platforms and that sort of digital interaction. However, what we have seen is it's sparking conversations when people do come visit the museum. So just speaking from personal experience, I've let folks know, we have this Kubier, we have this on Almanac Shanghai, 1946, 1947, available if you'd like to look at it. And people will come to me saying, I knew someone who was part of the Shanghai refugee community, and I never found out their whole story, but I knew they existed, and I'm able to say, well, the Almanac actually has a directory. It has a directory of people who were living in the community at the time. So you might be able to track down some more information about, your cousin or your neighbor, and something along that lines. So I think that in a roundabout way, it's been helpful already to solicit some of those stories and some of those testimonies. And in terms of linking it, yes. So video links are another possibility. We have video interviews with both her and Kubier, telling parts of their story, which are amazing, and we'd love to make that connected to the scrapbook as well. So that's sort of the next step for the scrapbook. And then I know that Lewis can talk a little bit more about the education side.
Yeah, so the educational programs at the museum are constantly evolving. But one of the main sort of goals for this year is to create an online teacher portal so that educators in the state of New Mexico and even across the country they'll get like a password and a username, and this portal will be free. And on that portal, there's going to be things like the Prezzies, which teachers can sort of download and use in their own classrooms, sort of however they want to use them for their lessons. And we're planning, to include our own lesson plans. We work really closely with a lot of Holocaust education organizations in the country that have their own lesson plans, and we sort of adapt things like that. So the plan is to have those on this sort of teacher website, which will be accessible from our own website. That's hopefully going to materialize later this year. And then I guess to the other part of your question is that, we want to work more with just making these digital stories available just out to the wider public. So the first story map I talked about the synagogues across Europe actually is published. To be honest, I'm not sure where you can find it. I don't think it's on our website. It was in a Facebook post that we made a little while ago. But it is published, so you can look for that if you'd like to. But these, like we're saying, are definitely things we've just started working with, and things that, like I said, we're a very small staff. So it's just, all work in progress, but we're really excited about the potential that they have.
I have a follow-up question for Lewis and Camelia. With the feedback form, as you're collecting that feedback, does it automatically connect to the specific point in one of the resources where the feedback is coming from, so that you have an idea of what someone is providing feedback about?
Right, in terms of does it say, it's actually connected to this page in the scrapbook. This is the point where the person accessed our form to respond. there is capabilities to have that link be trackable within Flipping Book, but it is at a higher price point than we're currently paying. So certainly there's potential to do that. The form itself sort of asks that information, can you please tell us what you're talking about specifically? And of course, somebody, are you okay with someone reaching out to you to discuss further is where we're at. But I think having, knowing that that tool is out there, I wouldn't say that it's totally off the table for us because that is very helpful, to be able to look at the exact page somebody was referencing when they decided to reach out and give us feedback. And although, we'd love to learn specifically about the scrapbook or images in the scrapbook or people represented there, sometimes people are able to share more contextual information about what was going on at the same time. So other members of, for instance, the community in Vienna at that time will have stories that they can share about, I remember that photography studio, we used to pass it on the way to our house, and we can build knowledge about other experiences that related to that same time or that same point in history that way as well. So yeah, hopefully that's something that we will be able to pursue down the line.
We don't have any other questions. We have a little bit of time. I have another question for our colleagues in New Mexico. The dollhouse seems like such a wonderful object to learn from. That's something that has probably a lot of mixed emotions to it. Something that brought the family a lot of great joy, but also has a lot of trauma associated with it. Could you talk a little bit more about that as a research object and what your experiences have been like interacting with it?
I'll just start by saying it's definitely like the kids' favorite thing in the museum, which is entirely valid because if you're like 13 years old and you don't care about history and you just got one person standing up there telling you about things that happened, 50 years ago, which might as well have been 800 years ago to most kids. But then they sort of see this dollhouse and the way that we've displayed it is like each room box gets its own section. You can see all the miniatures, it's like individually lit. And they spend all their time around there. And it's just cool because, like you were saying about the mixed emotions, like a lot of our work in a Holocaust museum is, it's really sad. So a lot of the things that we see and a lot of the materials that we work with, tell really, really harrowing stories, and they're very important stories, of course, but, it takes a toll on you, of course. But when you have something like this dollhouse, which just has so much just joy and love in it, and it's just such a testament to 6 generations of this family adding to it and adding to their story. It's just it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It might be the student's favorite thing in the museum. It also might be my favorite thing in the museum. Treasures is truly remarkable, and I was really lucky to be part of cataloging that when I first started at the museum. As Liz said, it's going to tell really a lot of stories. Hidden Treasures was of course hidden in this attic. It's talking about hiding during the Holocaust. It's talking about the family who had to flee. They were able to secure visas with a family here, with members of their family here in Las Vegas, New Mexico. So they're tied directly to New Mexico and New Mexico history. And as Liz says, just this continuation of family history and family story and family tradition, and sort of opening up our students' eyes to the ideas that family histories can get passed down in unconventional ways or ways that they might not be thinking of. It's not always just hearing stories or seeing them written down, right? Sometimes they come through things like toys or recipes or songs. And so Hidden Treasures can be sort of a good portal to begin having some of those discussions. So it's a very special collection, and it has a really beautiful story within it as well. Yeah, and the people who saved it, right? The family who did keep it hidden and reunited it with those I'm and her family back here in the United States. So it's a complicated and beautiful piece, and there's so much to look at. And I do hope that you will come and see it. It is truly remarkable. I have a question for CCP that'll probably maybe round out our time if nobody else has anything. I was curious as to if you found anybody who during your virtual sessions decided that they wanted to pursue research at CCP more because you were offering that service. If that service really encouraged them to pursue your collections more than they originally had planned to.
Yeah, I have an example. I set up a virtual reference session with, I think that these were people on the East Coast, but they were interested in writing a book on Elsie Bing, who is a photographer who escaped Nazi Germany around the same time that we have another photographer. But when I did the virtual reference session with them, I went over that we don't have her full archive here at the CCP. So we just kind of had bits and pieces of it. And unfortunately, it was not the information that they were looking for. But since we were on the call, I said that, we have another photographer, Breitenbach, who also escaped Nazi Germany. I actually think like right around the same time. So it was an opportunity to introduce them to another researcher that they are now apparently going to write a book about, and hopefully one day come to the CCP and visit. So they were very excited that even though one collection we didn't have the materials they were looking for, that they're able to look in the virtual reference at another collection. And we did a virtual reference where we looked at some of his Visa cards, we looked at some of his ration books. So that was really a really great experience.
And yeah, I can say this was mostly during me shadowing Emily in the virtual sessions that were not looking at materials per se, but just looking at our collections more in general. We do have a large number of graduate students or, those working on their research for school. So they're coming to us with, very early ideas of what they're trying to do, and maybe just have, one person came and was like, like their main focus was William Mortensen, who was a photographer who we keep. And really those meetings, we can easily look together and co-browse at our finding aid through A-Space and Emily's overall, knowledge of the collection. Every time, Emily really just suggests a bunch of different other collections that really, I think, looking at the researcher and hearing back to them really opens their questions more and shows more connections in terms of how our collections can help them. So I think really those kinds of sessions really make space for new what we're talking about and how to deepen their research and look at all the different kinds of materials we have at the CCP. So yeah.
Yeah, building on what Elias just talked about, I feel like one of the things that I try and focus on for our instruction sessions is on research strategies that, people really do. They might come here from another continent and stay for 4 days. And we really want to try and maximize their time here. So coming up with strategies for making direct questions based on their research topic can be helpful. And I think the other thing that's been really powerful for us is switching to archive space. So we started using archive space, I say right around the start of the pandemic. And we now have all of our finding aids in archive space. We didn't when I started here a bunch of years ago. And for those of you who use A-Space, that you already know this, the searching is really powerful. And so in addition to strategizing with researchers about what it is that they're trying to get out of their visit with us, showing them the strategies to search across collections simultaneously, or on the other hand, to dial into a specific collection and to search deeply within that collection. Those things can sometimes like prompt them to do additional research and come up with new avenues of exploration.
Thank you. Alrighty, looks like we are winding up our time. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us here in Albuquerque and online. Really appreciate it. Please get in touch if you have more questions. And if the CCC folks want to say goodbye, I'll let them as well.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming to our session. Reach out if you want.